Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for coming. Yeah, when they contacted me about giving a talk here, particularly a keynote, I was very excited and honored at the possibility. And a lot of people assumed, oh, you know, you're going to talk about all that gamepocalypse stuff. And I'm like, well, people can see that on the internet. I had the idea I wanted to talk about something that wouldn't be interesting or valuable at most venues, but that I thought would have some value here at Games for Change. And so there's the title of my talk today. Let's do a little simple survey here in the audience. Make this just a little bit interactive. Start with a simple question. In terms of their ability to change people's behavior, do you think that video games are A, less powerful than other media, or B, more powerful than other media? Hands up for A, less powerful. Hands up for B, more powerful. Of course, naturally, this audience, has a great faith in the ability for video games to sort of change people's behavior. So here's a second question. When people do play video games in general, do you think they change people A, for the worse, or do you think they tend to change people for the better? I'm not talking about the potential. I'm talking about the video games that exist and that people play. So hands up if you believe that generally video games are changing people for the worse. And hands up if you believe they're changing people for the better. Okay, here it's a slight margin and a slight margin for the better, and a lot of hands like I'm not ready to commit to that question yet, which I find interesting in that we have game developers who still aren't quite sure about this. Now, a lot of people have weighed in with opinions about these topics because the emergence of video games as a mass media has a lot of implications, because we know that all mass media have changed us. The telephone changed us, the telegraph changed us, radio changed us, the phonograph changed us, television. All of these things change us as a people, and we know that video games are changing us. Now, Stephen Johnson had written a book, Everything Bad is Good for You, where he made a strong case that the problem solving that happens in video game play is more good for people than you'd expect, and is part of the reason that people are really getting smarter every year, as it has been documented. And Jane McGonigal's a fascinating book, Reality is Broken, gets into the details of some of the ways, what people find so compelling about video games, and some of the ways that they have the potential to change us for the better. But now I want to get into the difficult question, the really hard question. Here's question 3. Playing video games tends to make people, A, more likely to reason and promote peace, B, more likely to fight and promote war. And there are certainly many people who feel strongly that that is the case. C, neither, it has no effect on either of these. Or D, I don't really have any idea about this. So who believes A? Not very many, a few. Who believes B? Yeah, some more. C, there's some. And how D? And the majority is D. So here we have in this room the group of people who is most likely to be creating video games that are designed to go out there and change people and change the world. And they have no idea about whether video games are making people more peaceful and more warlike. And I've done this same survey at different sorts of groups, different conferences, people who are professional entertainment game designers, and they have no idea what the things that they're doing, what effect they're having on people. They don't know. They're not sure. It ends up all being a big experiment that's happening, and we don't quite know how it's going to come out. And I think it behooves us, at very least, to think about it. Because, people talk about violence in video games, but if you look at your average video game, there's not necessarily that much, well, okay, in that one there's some violence, but if you look at this one, or, no, that's a bad example. No, next one. Oh, God. Yes, all right, here you go. So you look at your average video game, say Hello Kitty Roller Rescue. I mean, that's, it's rated E for everyone. It's a real friendly game. Hello Kitty, she's on roller skates, she's rescuing. Let's look at a clip from Hello Kitty Roller Rescue here. So here's Hello Kitty. She's got her magic wand, and she's out there. I think she just rescued somebody. Pretty sure that's how that works there. She's going to rescue. There's a policeman. He's got a whistle. She's rescuing him. Her friend there's got a frying pan. I don't know if you noticed that. So this is where you go to the cash machine here. She needs to eat cake in order to power herself up again there. The cake is a lie, Kitty. All right. So, but she needs to do it because she needs to save this tree because it's an environmental game. It's all about. All right. So what the hell is wrong with us? I brought this game home for my daughter when she was 5 years old. I thought, oh, cool, this will be like her first console game. It's Hello Kitty, roller skates, rescuing. She's going to be all into it. And, I sat her down with it. And the beginning's all about, get Hello Kitty ready for adventure. Get her all dressed up. And she's doing the tutorial and getting Hello Kitty all ready for it. And I go in the other room for a minute just to deal with something. And then I come back, and she's in the middle of this battle, and she's visibly upset. She is shaking. She is shaking and trembling. And I'm like, what's wrong? Are you stuck? Or is there a problem? And she throws the controller on the ground, and she looks at me, and she says, Hello Kitty doesn't fight. And then she, collapsed into tears. And I was kind of ashamed to be a game designer that day because she's right. It's Hello Kitty. Hello Kitty doesn't fight. Duh. But we keep doing this. Is it that we're just inherently evil? Or is it something about the medium? And I think it is something about the medium, personally. Video games have this tendency towards violence even when we don't want them to. I know I've embarked on many games where I'm like, yeah, this is going to be a thing. It's not going to have a violent side. It's going to have a creative thing. And then you get a few months of development. It's like, yeah, we kind of need to add a conflict. Yeah, we better have a villain. And next thing you know, you've got a combat mechanic in there. Well, how does this happen? So you got to consider what video games enable. Video games enable a world where you can do absolutely anything you want. Nobody gets hurt. And verbal communication is awkward or impossible. This is guy heaven right here, if you think about it, right? This is everything that guys are looking for. And it's not a new idea. It's a very old idea. It had a name. It was called Valhalla, right? So for people who aren't up on their Norse mythology, the idea of Valhalla is this. If you're a Viking and a noble warrior, that when you die, you go to Valhalla. And if you don't know the agenda, the schedule of events at Valhalla, it works like this. You get up in the morning, and you head out to the battlefield, because that's what you're going to do. You're going to have a battle, an epic battle, because that's what you do in Valhalla. And you spend your day having an awesome epic battle, with your guys against these other guys to kind of see who can win the battle. It's gruesome, it's gory, a lot of people are going to die, you might die, and at the end of the day, fortunately, everybody who's died and wounded, everybody gets up off the battlefield, and everybody heads out to the dining hall and has a great feast, and they all talk about how awesome the battle was that day and the battle they're going to do tomorrow. And you do that every day forever, right? Congratulations to us, we finally built Valhalla, right? So, for this question of do games make us more peaceful or more warlike is a very difficult thing to measure. The best I could think to do for today was to make a little bit of a scorecard. So we're going to show two sides. Here's the peace column, and here's the war column. And so far, in terms of what we've shown so far, we get one bullet in the war column, The nature of video games, violence comes easily to it. Games that are all about peaceful reconciliation and solutions are much more difficult to make. And so as to the question of do games make us more peaceful, more warlike, so far we have one bullet on the war side. So we should talk a little bit about the nature of simulated violence if we're going to explore this. It's an important question about, is simulated violence a bad thing? A lot of people intuitively feel, of course, it's a bad thing because simulated violence, it's just going to lead. It's going to be your gateway to real-world violence. And that's certainly one point of view, but there are other points of view that people have on this. I love what the comedian Jackie Kashian has to say on this. She says, it's true. There are plenty of video games that tiny children shouldn't play. I am a grown-up lady, and I need to shoot people. I think it's best if it occurs fictionally. And this isn't a new argument. This is an argument for catharsis, which it goes back to the days of Aristotle. The idea that being able to get certain things out of your system may actually be a good and healthy thing. Catharsis is an interesting question because, what you'd think, right, is that everyone knows that violent crime goes up every year because CNN tells us so. We hear it on the news all the time. Violent crime, as you can see on this graph, is constantly increasing, right? And we know that video games are getting more and more popular. The only way it would make any sense that this catharsis argument had any merit was if violent crime actually went down in conjunction with the rise and success of video games over the last 15 or 20 years. And what shocks people is that is what the graph actually says. Now, that's a horrifying idea. Oh my God, could that possibly be a cause and effect situation? It seems insane to say that. I mean, you can kind of imagine it. Maybe there's some kid who would be out on the streets busting car windows in or something, and maybe he'll just do that at home in Grand Theft Auto instead, and he gets it out of his system. Is that possible? The thing is, we have no idea. We know that these are how the numbers are. If you ask the FBI, why does violent crime gone down so much the last 20 years? They're like, because the policing is getting so much better. Maybe? I have no idea. But it is something we need to think about and understand because, my God, what if there's even a little bit of truth to this? If so, it's very important. If so, we need to be getting violent video games into the hands of as many people as possible. Well, maybe that's one on the peace side, catharsis. Maybe. We know catharsis intuitively has some value. Now, exploring this a little further, there's this book, A Theory of Fun for Game Design by Ralph Koster, where one of the things he talks about is what games appear to be on the surface isn't really what they are. That really games are very much an exercise about stripping away the garbage and being able to get to the abstract heart of a problem. And in other words, the things that we see on the surface, which, in some cases are kind of violence and explosions and all that, aren't really what gamers are learning. They're learning the strategies in order to win the game, and that stuff is what they're learning to sort of strip away. It's not what they see. And to some extent, there's an argument then that, then I guess that stuff doesn't matter. Or does it matter? Because that sounds an awful lot like desensitization, which is the thing that people worry about a great deal. It seems bad to be desensitized to violence. It seems bad to be able to just strip away all of the empathy that comes with that. Now, is it possible that entertainment simulations can desensitize? Can people actually be desensitized to violence at all? Is that really possible for humans to do? Well, we know it's possible. I mean, this is what doctors, surgeons have to do. They have to be able to cut holes into people and cut pieces away and not flinch at that. They need to be calm and collected, and there's blood all over the place, and they're fine with that. Same thing, law enforcement. Law enforcement officials, they have to learn how to calmly, rationally, thoughtfully shoot people in the head. It comes up, and it's something you need to do, and when you do it, you have to be very careful and considered, and you have to be, on some level, desensitized to it. So that we know with training, it's possible. But we also know that that's not really what people are worried about, right? People are worried about something darker. So let's look at the scorecard again here. Well, certainly if desensitization is possible through training, and video games have the potential to do that, that does certainly sound like it could lead to a more warlike practice, since this is a thing that soldiers do need to learn. But that's not what people are worried about. They're not worried that, kids are going to play these violent video games, they're all going to become doctors and police officers. That's not what they're worried about. They're worried about the Columbine situation. A group of kids who were, so out of touch with violence in any kind of healthy manner that they were able to create, a situation of absolutely hellish proportion. And this is what people are worried about. That can this happen? Here's an interesting book you might want to check out sometime by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. He wrote this book called Stop Teaching Our Kids to Kill. And this book is a little inflammatory, and I certainly think it takes certain arguments too far. But he makes strong arguments about the nature of military training and how it's changed over time. He talks about how during World War II, when so many untrained people were brought into the Army through the draft, that the firing rate for people with weapons was something like 15%. 15% of the time when people should have been firing their weapon, they weren't. And because they simply weren't trained to do it. They didn't want to do it. They did not want to shoot and kill people. They would, sometimes shoot into the air so they could be kind of doing what they were supposed to do, because it's not a natural thing to do. And that in the middle of the 20th century, they started developing new kinds of training systems. Systems that involved pop-up targets that looked like human figures that you would practice shooting with a stimulus response kind of move. When you saw one of these, bam, you'd shoot it, you'd shoot it, you'd shoot it, you'd shoot it. And as a result of this kind of training, that by the time we were at the Vietnam War, the firing rate had moved up to 85%. And this wasn't kind of an isolated thing. He was able to show data from other places when people haven't gone through this stimulus response pop-up target training, that their will to fire at human beings is way, way down. And his argument is, these pop-up shoot-at-human-figures trainers, we have now put them in the hands of children all across the country. Now, it's a strong argument to kind of say, well, wait a minute, that this is meaningfully lowering a barrier that's going to matter in society. But that certainly is one argument that we have unwittingly, filled our homes and our lives with killing simulators that train you to be ready to kill a person. So far it's not looking too good for peace, unfortunately. Well, let's press on. Now there's another side of this story. Two excellent books. One by Gerard Jones, Killing Monsters, and the other one, Grand Theft Childhood. And these are books about some of the surprising, counterintuitive effects that are involved with fantasy violence, some of which being video games. And I like this quote from Kuttner and Olson: exploring in a safe and controlled context what is impossible or too dangerous or forbidden is a crucial tool in accepting the limits of reality. Playing with rage is a valuable way to reduce its power. Being evil and destructive in imagination is a vital compensation for the wildness we all have to surrender on our way to being good people. This isn't catharsis they're talking about per se, but the idea that if you can play with your angry feelings and you can play with being in situations of violence, in situations of rage and damage, that you will have a better control when those situations show up in real life by having some level of practice with them, that you're going to be better off, which is why children intuitively play this way. You can take toy guns away from boys all you want, and they're going to play with sticks and shoot at each other, right? And I'm sure even before guns were invented, kids were using sticks as an action at a distance weapon, for bows and arrows or any kind of weapon, because it gives you a way to kind of play with these situations. And so this is a pretty strong argument on the peace side, I think, arguing for the nature of control, that these simulations, by letting you practice these, when they really show up, you won't be caught off guard. You'll be more in control, and you'll approach them more thoughtfully. I'd like for a moment to ask you to consider the orc. When I was about 13 years old, I got very enamored with Dungeons and Dragons. And the world of Dungeons and Dragons has a lot of fighting and a lot of battle, and one of the most common enemies that you meet is the orc. And the orc comes in many forms. There's goblins and hobgoblins, and sometimes it's zombies. But in all cases, it's humanoid figures that are less intelligent than we are, who are generally evil. And they're great for games because you can kill a whole bunch of them, and it makes the world a better place. They're not as smart as you, so you can take on a whole lot of them at once and feel very powerful. As a game mechanic, the orc is excellent and incredibly useful. And one thing I came to wonder, even when I was that age, was, why don't we have orcs in the real world? I mean, it's not just that, not just do we, not really orcs, but if you look at the animal kingdom and you look at the ramp of intelligence of creatures, it's a pretty smooth ramp from animal to animal to animal until you get to us. And there's this jump. You go from like pigs and monkeys to humans, and it's ridiculous. Where's the stuff in the middle? Why isn't there some kind of humanoid race that's like not as intelligent as us and maybe not bent on evil, but like, where are they? Well, we used to have them. They were called the Neanderthals. They were here not that long ago. They were here as recent as 30,000 years ago. Another humanoid species with us and among us. And they're all gone now. Now, if you ask anthropologists about this, there are different opinions about where they went. Some say, well, there was a bad winter. And one theory is there was a volcano. But the theory I kind of tend toward is, I think we killed them all. Because that's how we roll. You can ask the American Indians how they feel about that, the Native Americans, how they feel about this situation, but I'm pretty sure that's why we don't have orcs, is because we killed them all. And that's sort of terrifying to think about that. It's not out of the question that it's in our nature to destroy things that are competing with us that are a bit alien, right? You look at so much of the conflict in the world, and it so much is about conflict between people who just perceive the other as alien. So I'm going to put a controversial one here on the war side. What if humans are inherently racist? What if that's just how we are? And I mean, everybody has some kind of racist feeling at some time, where there's some other group that just seems alien and bad, and it's a difficult thing for people to overcome. And is it even possible for something like video games to have an impact? Can media even have an impact on something like that? And I think maybe it can, right? I remember when I was a kid growing up, I lived in suburban New Jersey, right? Lived in a town, had about 3,000 families. So there are approximately in that town 3,000 white families and 3 black families. I don't mean 3,000 black families, I mean 3 black families and 1 Vietnamese family, right? I didn't grow up, in a very multicultural situation. But as I went out into the world, and started meeting people, who came from other backgrounds, it didn't seem alien to me. And the reason was, there was a television show I watched every day. And it was called Sesame Street. And in Sesame Street, there were, black people and Hispanic people, black kids, Hispanic kids, and everybody played together. Everybody was just totally normal. And, I saw that there, and it's like, okay, that's not what's in my neighborhood, but I see that, yeah, look, they're doing all the same things we do. It's totally normal. And then when I really encountered it as a real person in the real world, it was totally normal to me through something as simple as just a television show. And the internet takes this farther, right? Right? This is the old cartoon here on the internet. Nobody knows your dog. The internet creates a world where we can interact with each other, and our physical appearance matters not at all. Not in the least. All that matters is our ideas and what we have to say and what we have to communicate. And games kind of take this one step farther because they let you form the identity that you want to form. Not how you are on the outside, but how you want to be on the inside is how you have the opportunity to appear in these worlds. And I think very often of the pioneering game designer Danny Berry, who was one of the early members of Electronic Arts when Electronic Arts was just getting started, and was was the designer on 7 Cities of Gold, which was a very pioneering game because it was all about coming to the new world, and you had the ability to decide how you wanted to be. You're going to be a Spanish conquistador, and if you want to be violent and take over the whole place, you can, or if you want to be friendly and make deals with everybody and kind of have pleasant settlements, you totally can. It's totally up to you. It was open and free form. Another one of Danny's games, Cartels and Cutthroats, was sort of silly. It's like it's a business simulation game, but it was a game 8 people could play simultaneously. Danny was really into multiplayer play, and Mule is probably one of Danny's most famous games. This 4-player game where you're on Mars making these weird decisions with other people about trading and such. I love the caption of this: a game in which up to 4 players attempt to settle a distant planet with the so-called help of a mule-like machine they all learn to hate. But this game, as a single-player game, really just wasn't that appealing. And then the very first commercial networked game, Modem Wars, was one of Danny's creations. Unfortunately, Danny died of lung cancer before the whole massively multiplayer game explosion happened. And I've always found it interesting to think about Danny's motives, because one of the interesting things about Danny is Danny was a woman born into a man's body. And so here you see Game Developer Conference 1991 and 92, after she decided to make the change and kind of have this be visible to the world. And I've often thought about that and how and I've always suspected that some of the reason that Danny's work was so pioneering was that, and I think for so many of us, the idea of a place where I can be who I want to be, who I know I really am, and not how people see me, was important and valuable. So, is it possible that if we start raising kids in a world where a significant portion of their play is with playmates who they can't see in real life, but who instead they see virtual avatars of, is it possible that this is a meaningful tool in order to kind of break boundaries and kind of create a unity and create peaceful situations that will raise people in a world where, when you interact with people, it doesn't matter how you look, it matters how you behave. That's a fascinating possibility and potential, and the online games are so new, we really don't know. Now, some people might say, well, yeah, sure, there's all that, sure, it doesn't matter how you look, but it does matter how you speak. Language is still always going to be a barrier for us. But we're seeing the language barriers dropping with technology all the time. Even 10 years ago, I remember having this weird experience playing Ultima Online one night, and I'm chatting with someone else who's playing the game, and I'm thinking, boy, this guy talks a little funny, you know? And then he said something about how I was talking funny, and I'm like, what? And then I realized